Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be implementing a custom action to our house view set that is going to allow house managers to actually remove member from houses. So without anything further to do, let's get into it. So to do this, what I'll do is I'll follow the same blueprints that I've been doing for our join and leave actions, where I'll first create a new method, which I'm going to call remove_member. And then this is going to get self request and then primary key, which we can default to none, passed into it. And then what we'll have is we're going to have a try except block. Once we have this, the next thing I'd like to do is that I'd like to mark our actual function with the action decorator, and then I'm going to set the detail attribute for this equals to true. Following that, we also have to set the actual methods, and in this case the methods are also going to be post and post only, and keep in mind post needs to be all small letters. And finally, following that, we'll have a permission classes attribute, which we'll set to the permission classes that are going to work upon this specific action. Since our view set has the permission classes is house manager or none, to have the same permissions as our view set applied to our remove member action, all we can do is that we can just omit the permission classes option, and this way whatever permissions that our house view set is subject to, our action is going to be subject to as well. So now that we have this, the final last thing I have to do is that I have to define the name, and the name for this is going to be and it's going to be remove member. So once we have these three new properties defined for our actual action decorator, we can start coding our actual function. So the first thing is always I'll try to get the house, which is going to be self.getObject. Once we have the actual house object, the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to get the actual user ID that our actual house manager wants to remove. So for this, what we'll do is that we'll have the user who's sending us a request pass us a user ID in the request body, and then we'll get that here. So for that, I'll take the user ID from request, which gets passed to us, as you can see, as the second argument. Then we'll have the data property for that request, and from there we're going to do get. And what are we going to get? Well, we're going to get user ID. And if we are unable to find this specific key, then we'll just return none for the user ID. And now I'll check to see that if the user ID is none, because if it is none, then we cannot proceed and we have to return a error telling our user that they have to provide an actual user ID. In this case, we'll return a response in which we'll have this dictionary where we'll set our actual user ID key, and then I'll just give a message to it which will say not provided. So which will indicate to the actual user that they have to provide our user ID. And then finally, what I'll do is that I'll set the status for this actual response to status .http. And then it's going to be 400 bad requests. So if I just scroll down, there it is, http://400_bad_request. So we'll only proceed ahead of this point if we have access to the user ID. Once I have access to the user ID, I need to get the specific user profile. To do that, I'll create a new variable in which I'm going to store the user profile. And to get the user profile, we'll have to filter the user database, find the user with the specified user ID, and then get the profile from them. But before we can begin, we need to import the user model. So I'm going to go to the top of our actual viewsets.py file, and then from django.contrib.auth, I'm going to import the actual user model. And it's actually auth.models. So auth.models and then import user. So once I have the user model imported, I'm going to go down and I'm going to do user.objects. And from the objects, we require a specific object. Hence, we're going to use a get function on this. And then inside of get, we can pass in the actual key that we want to filter by. And in our case, I want to filter or get the user which has the ID that was given to us. To do that, we'll set the primary key equals to the user ID. So in this way, we're going to get the user object from our database for which the primary key, which is the ID of the user, matches our user ID. And then following that, I'll access the user's profile. So now that we have this, the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to now perform an if check to see if the user is in our house. So I'm going to do user profile in, and then from there we're going to do house.members.all. And if the user is in our house, then we can actually remove them. And the way we're going to remove them is that we're going to get our actual house members list, and then we're going to remove the actual user profile from it. So for that, we need a reference to it. So I'm going to go and create the actual house members variable here, which will store a reference to our house members list for this specific house. And to access it, I'll do house.members. Then I'll replace this statement where we do house.members.all with just house.members.all, because now we have access to house.members from house_members variable. Then we can do the all method on it. And now what we can do, if we know that the user is in the house, we can do house_members.remove. And this will remove the specified user profile from the house members. And finally, what I'll do is that I'm going to do house.save. With this, I'll return a response, and the response in this case is going to be a success response that we usually send empty. And so I'm just going to return a response, which is going to be status.http_204 no content. If our user is not a house member, then what we're going to do is that we're going to return a response which will just say that the user is not a member for this house. So I'll just return response detail user not a member in this house, and then the status of 400. And now I'm going to catch a very specific exception, and that is going to be the exception in the case that we try to access or get a user object which does not exist, or the provided user ID is invalid. In that case, I'm going to catch an exception, and I'm going to accept this, and I'm going to catch this exception by doing accept user dot does not exist exception as E. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to return an actual response that will let the user know that the provided user does not exist. So I'm just going to return a response in which I'll have the detail which says provided user ID does not exist, and then status, which is going to be 400 bad request. With this, we can do command save. So now to test this, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to firstly run our server. Then I'm going to open up Postman. And to verify, I'll go to our actual houses endpoint for our house, which is going to be Gryffindor, for which I'm the manager. And here in extra actions, I can now see remove member as an option. So I'm going to click on remove member and just copy the URL. And then I'm going to go to our actual join house request, and I'm going to right click on it and click on duplicate. And then here, I'm just going to rename this request. I'm going to rename to remove member. With this, what I'll do is that I'll actually set the authorization to bearer token, which is already set. And now I need a new token. So I'm going to go to username authentication, and I'll try to get a token for the Gryffindor house manager. And the house manager in this case is me, Hussein. So I'm going to get the token for us because only house managers are able to remove members. I'm going to send this request, get the specified token, and then put it here for the token. With this, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to replace the actual join URL so with the remove member URL. So just copy and paste it in here. And I know that Hussein is the manager for this house with this specific ID, hence this should work. And then finally in our body, I'm going to click on form data and then give it the user ID. And which user would I like to remove? Let's go back. So I have a choice of 3 users. I'll remove the user with profile ID 2, and that user has ID 4. So I'm going to copy this user ID and I'm going to put it here. And with this, if I send a post request, hopefully this should work. So sending a post request, we get a success status code for the 204 no content. And if I go back to our actual house list and I reload the actual house list, you're going to see that for our house Gryffindor, we only have 2 members now. It's 1 and 4. And finally, the last thing I'll do is I'll make Harry Potter join the house again. So for that, I'm going to go to your username authentication. I'm going to authenticate as Harry Potter to get a token for them. Get the token, and then go to our join house request. And then for the authorization, update the token, go to and then make sure that the house ID is correct, which I know is correct. It corresponds to Gryffindor's ID. And then if I click send, we are all good now. So with that, we're done. And we have successfully implemented the functionality for our house managers to actually remove members from our house. So with that, I'm going to end this video here. I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Thank you.